What's with all the peeing in this game?
Hello, fellow netizens, and welcome to Scandalous Games, the show where we take a closer look at video game-related controversies. I'm Kevin Impellizeri, and I do the research and share the story of a video game-related controversy to my friends. Welcome back to part 2 of our remastered, re-released, special features-loaded version of our episode we did a few years ago on Postal 2. So last time we looked into the development and the less than stellar reception to Running with Scissors 2003, follow-up to their 1997 flagship game Postal. And this time around, we're going to talk about what's been going on after the game's release, sort of the game's post-release life, and how Running with Scissors found a second life for Postal 2. I'll throw things back over to past me, talking with video game newbie Phil Thomas, Nintendo fan Andy Hunter, and video game dad Elford Stephens for the second part of our remastered Postal 2 episode. I hope you enjoy. All right, let's get back on track here. So financially, I cannot tell you how well this game did because I've never really found good sales figures on it. That didn't stop Whiptail from boasting 2 weeks after Postal 2 came out that the game was the #1 selling PC game at GameStop and EB Games, I think conveniently ignoring the fact that that's the only retailer who was carrying it. They claimed it was sold out and on back order, and Desi also later claimed that Postal 2 had done pretty well in EB Games and GameStop, although he also acknowledged that it gained little retail penetration elsewhere. However, while I didn't love Postal 2, I will tell you one audience it was quite popular with: moral conservatives. Because for politicians and moral activists, Postal 2 was an absolute godsend. It proved a handy go-to example when they argued that video game violence is out of control and needed to be kept out of the hands of children by legislation if necessary. It also helped provide evidence of why video games needed to be treated differently than other forms of media. So like, for example, so you're saying a video game where you can decapitate a cop with a shovel, set him on fire, and piss on him to put him out deserves the same kind of protection under the law as Great Expectations. So it provides a convenient example of like, these are the reasons why games need to be treated differently. These are why games need to be curtailed. And footage of Postal 2 appeared in a lot of the state legislatures and courts where they're debating these different laws banning access to video games. And go back to our Brown v. EMA episode, for example, of a bunch of them during this time. Postal 2 made very frequent appearances at these various court cases. It also made a lot of Moral Crusaders' worst games lists. So, for example, in December of 2003, it appeared on the National Institute of Media and the Family's annual list of media-wise games to avoid. We'll do NIMF as maybe a full episode somewhere down the line. But if you recall from our first Postal episode, the National Institute of Media and Family also had the original Postal on their games to avoid from 1997. So some consistency between the Postal games for that. And in fact, a callback to an old friend of ours, it also appeared on a similar list compiled by Illinois Governor and future convicted felon Rod Blagojevich. All of this, against all odds, put Postal 2 in the same sentence as such illustrious titles as Halo 2, Doom 3, Half-Life, and Grand Theft Auto San Andreas. So way to go, Running with Scissors. We did it. Media outlets also tried to link Postal 2 to several violent crimes. On January the 12th, 2006, 20-year-old Alexander Kopsev went on a stabbing spree in a Moscow synagogue, wounding 9 people. And reports of the stabbing described Kopsev as an avid gamer whose favorite game was allegedly Postal 2. And a January the 13th, 2006 report in Pravda on the attacks is a masterclass in video game alarmism, painting Kopsev as, in their words, a zombie programmed to kill by violent video games and a victim of what the writer called video game epilepsy syndrome. However, more in-depth reporting revealed that Kopsev's synagogue attack probably had less to do with Postal 2 reprogramming his brain and more to do with the fact that he was a neo-Nazi. Later that year, reports also attempted to link both Postal and Postal 2 to a September the 13th, 2006 mass shooting at Dawson College in Montreal, as well as a string of arsons in Gaston County, North Carolina in 2008.
I think the most surprising thing about all of those examples is that there's actual evidence of 4 people having willingly played this game. There's actual evidence.
It's like that Simpsons joke, Mr. Vice President, someone bought a copy of your book, sir. And if you're going to talk about moral conservatives reacting to a violent video game, you can't have a games announcement party without our old friend, Mr. Jack Thompson. This is following up on a question that you had, Elford, when we did the first Postal episode of what was Jack Thompson thinking about the Postal series? Here's the answer for that. So Jack was clearly aware of the series. In fact, he even drew some inspiration from Postal 2. If you recall his modest video game proposal, which was his infamous October the 10th, 2005 open letter, where he offered a $10,000 charitable donation if a game company would develop a game in which all of his personal enemies were brutally killed. And for more on that, check out our two-part series on Jack Thompson. In one scene, Thompson described the game's protagonist storming his way into the home of Paula Eibel, who was a stand-in for then Take-Two CEO Paul Eibler, murdering her and her entire family and peeing on their exposed brain stems, quote, just as you do on the decapitated cops in the real video game Postal 2, end quote.
What's with all the peeing in this game?
Sounds like some sort of fetish to me.
Yeah, I'm with you, Alfred. I'm sorry. Please continue, Kevin. I just had to point that out. It's really inexplicable.
No one had the balls to make a game where you piss on people. So I guess they decided they were going to carve that specific niche. So that's one instance where Postal 2 inspired Jack Thompson. In September 2006, Thompson was one of several moral crusaders to come out of the woodwork to blame Postal for the Montreal shooting I mentioned a minute ago, sending an email to press outlets with the subject heading, quote, Jack Thompson right again. Around this time, this is one of my favorite parts of the story. Around this time, Jack Thompson also made a really interesting claim. According to Jack, in 2005, he challenged none other than Vincent J. Desiderio Jr. to a debate. In a January 2006 email, Thompson told a reporter from the gaming site Total Video Games that he actually thought the great philanthropist, quote unquote, Penny Arcade should cover the cost of his proposed debate with Desi. That's a reference to when someone developed a version of Jack Thompson's murder game. He, again, promised a $10,000 donation, and he didn't do it. He reneged on the deal. And Jerry Holkins and Mike Kahulik, the guys who run Penny Arcade, made a $10,000 donation to the Entertainment Software Association, which is the charitable arm of the Entertainment Software Association. Hey there, fellow netizens. This is Kevin in the editor show with a brief correction here. What I meant to say here was not, of course, saying the Entertainment Software Association as the charitable arm of the Entertainment Software Association. I meant to say the Entertainment Software Association Foundation. So apologies for the slip of the tongue, and back to the show. With the subject heading for Jack Thompson, because Jack Thompson won't. That's what Jack's referencing here. So the great philanthropist, Penny Arcade. And that according to Thompson, Desi allegedly turned him down. And dude, as an aside, I would legitimately pay money to see Vince Desi and Jack Thompson in a public forum yelling at each other. So if you're listening to this, Jack Thompson, Vince Desi, make it happen. Let's do it. Give the people what they want.
And then Uwe Boll challenges the winner to a boxing match, right?
Yes, we figured it out. I love this idea. Make it happen, internet. However, I don't think Jack ever challenged Vince to a debate. And all of that has to do with the egos of both of these guys, both Vince Desi and Jack Thompson. On the one hand, as a general rule, Jack Thompson can never be your first source on any information. Because number one, he is self-serving to a fault and frequently exaggerates or overstates his role in things that directly involve him. And number two, he has a history of making shit up. On the other hand, if Thompson had challenged Desi to a debate, you cannot tell me that Vince Desi and Running with Scissors wouldn't be shouting from the rafters about it. I mean, Joe Lieberman in 1997 denounced Postal 1 as digital poison, and the company's been milking his response for the last quarter century. The easiest difficulty in Postal 2 is called Lieber mode. After the U.S. Postmaster General sent a letter to Running with Scissors discouraging them from releasing Postal, that was back in April of 1997, not only did Vince Desi frame the letter and put it in his office, when they put Running with Scissors' studio in Postal 2, I did mention that. The dudes from Running with Scissors inserted themselves in their own game. They made a digital version of Vince Desi's office, and they put the letter from the U.S. Postmaster General in his virtual office. So you cannot tell me that they wouldn't make sure everyone knew that Jack Thompson wanted to debate Vince Desi. That's what makes me think that Jack never really did this, that he just claimed he did it, because I feel like Desi's ego wouldn't allow him to not associate that. Any kind of public press, the guys at Running with Scissors were jumping on, that people were talking about their game. That being said, I'm totally willing to be proven wrong. And if people have evidence that they actually had an exchange about this, scandalousgamespodcast@gmail.com. In any case, debate challenge notwithstanding, on January the 18th, 2006, following the Moscow synagogue attack, Desi published a statement directed specifically at Jack Thompson, accusing the Florida attorney of engaging in a, quote, despicable, self-serving campaign to spread misinformation and hateful invective about Running with Scissors and Postal in particular and the entire video game industry in general, end quote. Now, going back to Running with Scissors, you might be wondering how they felt about the game's less than stellar reception. Publicly, the company tried to roll with the punches, maintaining their time-honored philosophy that any publicity is good publicity. In 2006, when the company released a compilation of Postal and Postal 2, they printed the 0 out of 10 from Computer Gaming World, as well as Robert Coffey's amazing closing sentence for the review of Postal 2 on the game's box. I told you we'd come back to that. So if you open up the box for that, you'd see until someone boxes up Syphilis and sells it as retail, Postal 2 is the worst product ever foisted upon consumers. Desi also eventually trademarked the phrase worst game ever. That is real. He really did that. However, when addressing Postal 2's fan base, Desi took on a significantly different tone. Following the goose eggs the game received from gamer and computer gaming worlds, Desi put out a letter through the Running with Scissors mailing list that I can only describe as a massive shit fit, railing against the game's negative reception in positively Trumpian terms. I'm quoting this letter verbatim. Quote, only because I'm being swamped with emails telling me about some a-hole journalist imposters at Computer Gaming World and Gamer magazines do I feel compelled to write to you, the greatest fans in the world, greatest fans is in all caps, it is you and only you who we care about. I've just returned from a rare vacation and have learned of the perfect score, 0, that we received from some thesaurus-smoking rape clown writer at CGW and an identical twin turd at Gamer. Now 2 zeros plus 2 a-holes equals pure crap. Pure craps in all caps. These guys have their tongues firmly implanted in the anuses of their sterile parent game publisher, Ziff Davis. Ziff Davis owned Gamer and Computer Gaming World at the time. Now, I don't mind that they use Running with Scissors or Postal to grab attention to their failing tampon of a rag magazine, but it's a real disservice to mislead their subscribers, gamers, and everyone in the gaming community. People pay hard-earned money for their magazines, and they look for accurate information and reviews about games, not political expressions by closet case pseudo-journalists. My apologies to all who have paid for these moralistic manifestos. One can only suspect that they're on the payroll of the Lieberman for President campaign. So much for independence and originality. God bless America. That's in all caps. We sure can use it. So I say to you, to hell with them. Let's not waste our valuable time stretching these a-holes. Let's move on and have fun, play Postal, destroy, kill, and enjoy life. Always V. Thoughts?
I guess there was more wrong in America than Gary Coleman.
You know, his statement, very interesting because it really does read just like he's some sort of fringe politician trying to rally his base versus a video game developer. Because one of the beautiful things about video games is the court of opinion is based on the gamers for real, not really based on like perceptions that gamers are given by reviews or by talking heads, but what actually gamers actually are going to do with their time. It's very different than a lot of the other things people think they have opinions of. Like there are many people who walk around and say, I like this game, but they only play it for 2 hours and never think about it again. And all this data is being kept nowadays and recorded, and you can see just what games people actually want to play. And so if Postal didn't sell, it's because Postal wasn't very good, but he's pitching it as if this is like some sort of political action that's going on. I find that very interesting. I wonder where he is in life now. Like, is he still in video games, or is he, trying to make a different sort of career with these talents of his and his word choices?
Elford, something you said really struck a chord with me. Based on his response, it seems like Vince Desi, like those negative reviews hit a real nerve with him. And he telegraphs that the only reason these reviewers would put something so hurtful out there is because they're clearly trying to draw attention to themselves. and there's no actual merit behind the thing they put out there. That's the first thing he thinks. Why do you think that was the first conclusion he jumped to?
Yeah, and I also think, like, in his letter, it seemed like he was only taking issue with people's criticism of the messaging in the game. Like, he did not at all really dispute, like, the combat is bad, the loading times are too, like, it's like he himself was also only looking at this game as this political artistic expression and not as a game. And yet then he can't take the criticism of people responding to it on that level of.
Yeah, it seems interesting that he's so triggered by that. It seemed to somehow come as a shock to Desi that a game that was deliberately created to be offensive and shitty would get reviews for being offensive and shitty. How dare you, critics? I also find it funny that a guy who was committed to making provocative games would get so triggered when people end up not liking them. But maybe I'm reading too much into that.
Well, I would disagree a little bit. Not that I really disagree with the spirit of what you said, but the only thing I would add is that they hit him where it hurts. It's like he's clearly trolling, but like this game is filled. But the reason you shouldn't play it is because it's not fun, right? That's why you shouldn't play it. It's a waste of time because it's not fun to play. And we don't actually need to protest this game because no one will actually play this game because it's not fun. The only 4 people we have any independent evidence of having played this game were mass murderers who lived in isolation, right?
And me.
Oh, geez.
And
yeah,
me.
I was worried about you. When you hit me with some of your initial research, Kevin, I was like, yeah, we better check on this motherfucker. Like,
We appreciate the sacrifice. This game could be a completely different story. And it's not unlike that director we covered in a previous episode where, a little bit more talent and understanding of what it takes to make good video games. It could be a completely different story where we're talking about a game that has merit as a good game, but maybe we don't like some of the undertones of what the story is trying to say. Are you going to show us any video of this game?
Would you like to see it?
Yes, because I've never seen it.
I think we need to see what this game's about.
Okay, let me cue something up here. Okay, so I'm going to show you. This is from the World of Long Plays one I have up initially. This is the pacifist run, so you can see the guy wading through lines. So this is what the game looks like. Also, it doesn't look great by today's standards, but as I recall, this is pretty comparable graphics-wise to what a lot of games. It was built on the Unreal 2 engine, which was a pretty popular engine at the time. Unreal Engine is obviously still used now. BioShock was built on Unreal Engine.
Bring your money to me over here, please. Hello.
This is the buying milk.
Up yours, pig. Thank you for your unclean visit. Now get out and come again, please.
Unclean visit.
Bring your money to me over here, please now. Hello, and what do you want? This is not a standard looking place. That will be $10.
It takes time to make games.
Please, thank you.
And like this took a lot of thought to do this.
Money line forms that way, infidel.
Infidel.
That made him wait in line and go to the back of the line. If you cut line, you have to go to the back of the line.
Probably. That will be $10.
Here you go.
Thank you for your unclean visit.
Kick
now
me.
Get out and come again, please.
All right, I'll try to find a combat law. There's a combat-based long play I found over here too. I think this is a combat-based long play.
Also, is that guy supposed to be Arab or Indian?
Yeah, that's a good
Yes.
question.
Yeah, the answer is yes.
Pick up
That is a good question.
I definitely need more of that.
This is some of the combat. Let's see if I'll try to find the exact same scenario, but now
Do
it's
you switch between first person and third person?
No, it was first person the whole time.
Oh, okay.
Okay, let me find the convenience store again, and I believe this person does it violently. You can also kick ATMs for money. Because that's the other thing, they'll gatekeep stuff. If you wanted the pacifist run, you have
God,
to.
what's that awful stench? Did
Besides,
someone slaughter a goat in here? No, seriously, I want to know.
besides it hurt. I think he just steals. You can also just steal the money too. So he just took the milk.
too easy.
That's another barrier the game will do, is like you have to pay to do stuff. So like if you didn't have money, you had to go traipsing around finding money too. And the game gets more expensive as it goes in terms of what stuff you have to do. Here we go. And you try to
I hope nobody is taping this. I gotta find more. I feel to get off the top
Wait, did
floor.
she scream,
Sure that
hey, after she'd just been blown in half?
possibly. So of course, there's an old lady terrorist in the back of this guy's
Feel my
convenience store.
legs. I definitely need. Oh,
Sophia.
yeah.
And that's,
In the reflection, he also looks like Neo from The Matrix, which is like another ripoff.
yeah, and that's right, because The Matrix came out 4 years before this. Yeah. So yeah, that's Postal's game.
Interesting game.
Postal, you can beat it in 3 hours. I think I played it for more than 3 hours, and I got through 3 days. That's all I had tolerance for.
During your time, did you feel like there was an overlying story to the game?
No,
Did you feel like there was any character development?
no. I think it was more, the real story was the testing of my patience.
You know, I wouldn't want somebody to go back and remaster and put any more effort into this game. But this story could be completely different if they had done several basic things that other games at the time were doing, such as simply writing a story that was going to be interesting for most people. You can make your character crass, like Duke Nukem was crass, you know. You can make your character have these sort of leanings, and just some people are going to not be interested in his wanting to use racial slurs and sexist. Some people are not going to be interested in that. But if they had made the game have some sort of story, made the combat fun and interesting, and made the choice to do things violently versus what they're calling passively. I would call it normally, because they're not really putting me in a situation to be a pacifist. They're just putting me in a situation, do some things normally. If they would have made that choice interesting, like for instance, I think you referred to BioShock already. And BioShock does a very good job of capturing the morality of your choices in the game. But it doesn't, if you are unaware up front, you don't know what the outcome of your choices are going to be till the end. Where this game is trying to up front say that you're making these moral choices when you're really not. If the choice is steal the milk or spend hours running around town looking for dollar bills so that you can buy it, that's ridiculous. I mean, it's just, nobody's going to want to do that. So good riddance.
Yeah, if I were to guess, I feel like Vince Desi in Running with Scissors aspired to a philosophy that John Carmack said years and years ago. When asked about video game stories, he said, story in a game is like a story in a porn movie. It's expected to be there, but it's not important. And I wonder if it's kind of like that. Their whole thing is that games are only supposed to be fun and only supposed to be entertaining. Like, I would see them as thinking the story is not terribly important.
Yeah, which, I mean, I think we probably can each think of a game that we like that either doesn't have a story or doesn't have much story. But it's like, for a game that clearly is setting out to have such a strong identity, to then not have a story. I think, like, Elford, you brought up Duke Nukem. I feel like that's a really apt comparison, because I think they were really thinking that, oh, Postal Dude is like Duke Nukem. He'll make these little quips, and the audience will think, oh, this guy is cool. I mean, I've never played a Duke Nukem game, so I have no idea if Duke Nukem actually is cool or not. But from what we just heard of Postal Dude, I do not think they succeeded.
So what I think is weird about this game is that it's one of the only games I've ever seen where you have to share a worldview that the creator of the game also has in order to be able to engage with it. Like, the reason a lot of video games don't have real storylines is because the game is fun to play. The actual gameplay is fun, and coming up with an elaborate story is kind of getting in the way of that. But this one, you kind of have to share the view that people who are not there to expedite your quality of life deserve to be killed with impunity. Like, you have to share that in order to be able to engage with this game. And I, quite frankly, I don't know of any other games that make an assumption like that up front.
I think what you guys are saying is exactly it. This game is defining itself by its statements. Unlike a game like some of our really popular modern shooters, which are defining themselves mostly by the technical advancements they're making and how fun it is to get into multiplayer and how advanced. So people are building their own stories by having their teams of real people that meet up online and playing the games together. And so these games have grown into huge industries, and they don't need an elaborate story. Most of them have a single player that you could play through, but most people aren't buying it for that. And you have lots of games that don't have story. But when these guys pitch these ideas that are about, okay, there's people that need to know the real truth, and this is how the world is, then I start looking for story. And when I don't find anything, I feel very empty, because there isn't the other aspects of gameplay that are necessary for a good video game that would allow a video game that's storyless. And it's layered on top is the bunch of crap that they're telling me, right? Which in Duke Nukem, he never goes this far, but he does do a lot of sexual humor and a lot of stupid teenage sort of humor that, you might chuckle at because you couldn't believe he said that. But the game was fun to play. You could have been somebody else. It was like Wolfenstein or Doom. It was fun to play the game. Whereas this looks really, really lame. And they try ideas, but Grand Theft Auto 3 was amazing. And if they're copying it, they left out some of those aspects that Grand Theft Auto 3 and its follow-ups did do, and they're not doing. And so it's really hard to tell a story that all people are going to appreciate. So if you want to do something niche like this, where your story is supposed to capture this segment of a population, and you're going to say that it's maybe 25%, maybe it's 5%, maybe it's 50%, then you're going to need even better writing to try to draw even those people into your story. Because here you have a story. There's a man who is having a bad life, and he's with a partner who's not very kind to them. Okay, in 7 days, what's going to happen with this character, right? Because that's actually what this game is. This game is not about gameplay. They don't put any effort into it. So to me, this game's about nothing. It's about nothing except talking points, and they just fail to get it. But developing these games is art, It's not easy. So this helps me appreciate the people that do. A good example of a game that doesn't go wild with story is the Souls series, especially the original ones. Like, you can play through the game and barely know the story, but then you can go back and you can dig if you're interested and learn that there's this storyline going on that you're actually participating in. And furthermore, the way you play those games is the story. The story itself is directly related to that. So, what happens to a human being who goes to a convenience store and pulls out a machine gun and starts shooting it, right?
I think that's really insightful, Alfred. But I mean, what I would add to that is that it's telling that the creator of this game doesn't feel it's necessary to explain that worldview. Like, he's making an assumption that all of these things should be obvious and natural. It should be obvious to you that the game player, that you go into a store and you get frustrated that everyone's not white. What's with all these non-white people in here? Why can't I steal this with a bandit? Why is a woman trying to talk to me? I mean, obviously I should be able to kill with impunity at that. Like, none of that stuff is explained because they're making an assumption that that type of feeling should be an obvious and popular opinion.
And I think that's something that comes out of this game. Yeah, so here's this worldview, and like going back to the idea of humor, and like if they're trying to emphasize this as a satire, and like all this is supposed to be like, where's the satire? Like, for example, in saying that in this convenience store, it smells awful, and there's this foreign person on the other side of the glass, and I can go behind a room and find terrorists. What's the satire there? Like, what were we trying to say about that? And aside from just saying the thing, just that we're saying that thing. It's not subtext, it's text. And I think you guys make really good points with that. Like, it's definitely emphasizing a kind of worldview, and they're definitely saying something about stuff. And we'll talk more about their politics because that's going to come up soon. All right, pulling this back to the So we saw that Desi was not particularly happy with the critical reception. And I think on a certain level, Running with Scissors knew their games were going to get lambasted by critics. For example, during the April 10, 2003 press release, right before Postal 2 came out, Running with Scissors declared, quote, "We made Postal 2 for our fans, not for politicians, parents, or penis-challenged critics," end quote. Now, with all of that in mind, with this reception from the critics and this response by Desi, I'm going to present you with three options. You're the head of Running with Scissors. You just put out a game that got a pretty poor critical reception and a mixed reception at best from gamers. What do you do next? Do you A, ignore your critics, because haters are going to hate and just keep going? B, use the negative reviews as motivation to drive you toward new and original ideas with the thought that you'll win the critics over in the long run? Or C, aggressively try to discredit anyone who is critical of you? What do we think?
I say B.
See?
I feel like C is very much the philosophy espoused by the game itself. It sounds like, it's either get out of my way or get out of my way.
Now, longtime listeners will know that whenever I offer the three options, the answer is always C. And if you select the C, then congratulations, you're Vince Desi. Because for the next several years, Desi and other members of Running with Scissors went out of their way to discredit and delegitimize anyone who gave Postal 2 a bad review. This tactic coalesced into two narratives from the company. The first is that people who reviewed Postal 2 negatively never actually played the game. For example, in a 2006 Gama Sutra interview, Desi observed, quote, "The only thing that still drives me nuts is when a critic or reviewer actually tells me they haven't played Postal or even seen it, and they go on to write a negative or misleading story or uneducated review," end quote. In a 2010 GamePro article, Postal 2 producer Mike Jarrett, better known online as Mike J, presented an account of IGN's review of Postal 2 that sounds so provably false, I'm amazing he wasn't sued for slander. Quote, "IGN was one of the first websites to put out a review of Postal 2. And if you remember, they did a 5.5 out of 10. IGN was one of the first websites to post a review of Postal 2. Their review went up 2 hours after their package was delivered. You can read the review yourself. It was very obvious the guy didn't even play it. The reviewer played the game and wrote the entire story in 2 hours. I'm not saying you should like every game. There's a lot of terrible games out there. But if you're going to hate something right out of the box, you shouldn't be reviewing games. A lot of work goes into games and everybody should be given their fair trial," end quote. Boo fucking who?
But I feel like the subtext there is he's saying, like, look, the load times in this game are so long. I know he wouldn't even have time to start this game in 2 hours.
I cannot believe Mike J saying this. That's a really shitty thing for a developer to say, especially because they know how these review things are put together. Review packages go out weeks before games are put out to the public, and he knows that. He definitely knows that. And in fact, when asked for comment, Ivan Sulik, who wrote the 5.5 out of 10 review for IGN, explained he received his review code for Postal 2 days in advance, and he had put in between 20 and 30 hours, and my hat is off to him. And I've read his review. It pretty much reflects the stuff I've said to you about my experience in this game. He totally played this game. I would say that I'm not calling Mike J a liar, but he is lying. That's a lie. But you know what? Not everyone hated Postal 2. And for evidence of a positive review, I want to call attention to a fascinating one I came across while perusing the GameFAQs user reviews. This is one of my favorite parts of the story, by the way. Posted on December the 30th, 2003 by someone calling themselves Rogie, like Hoagie, but with an R. The review gave the game a 9 out of 10. I call attention to this review in particular because while I cannot definitively prove this, I strongly believe it was written by someone with Running with Scissors, if not Vince Desi himself. Rogie praised the game across the board, with the loading times being the only slight knock against it. But the majority of this review reads as a response to Postal 2's negative critical reviews, with the writer going out of their way to explain that the game is actually well designed and that the game's absurdist humor is what makes its humor so effective. Also emphasizing that Running with Scissors were definitely not just trying to use controversy to sell a game. At one point saying, quote, "In terms of the gameplay, it is clever and well thought out. The level design is good and pleasing to the eye. The weapons range from urination to rotting cowheads to a cat used as a silencer. Again, this is over-the-top humor. The game does not make you want to go out to do this stuff because it is obviously absurd, thus the humor. Get it, people?" End quote. And that was actually another argument that they would make a lot in the public, is saying that, like, our games are not that bad because people obviously aren't going to go do this in real life. So that's another talking point of Running with Scissors, to say something like that. That obviously they're not going to do this in real life, and therefore it's funny. Also, as with Running with Scissors, Rogi also suspected that critics who reviewed the game poorly didn't actually play it, saying, quote, "It is obvious to me that the MAG reviewers did not play this game at length, for if they had, they would have been quite amused," end quote. However, aside from all of this, the thing that stands out to me as possible evidence that Desi wrote this, or someone at Running with Scissors wrote this, is the title they chose for this review. Rogi chose the title of the review, quote, "Over-the-top Pulp Fiction style humor and gameplay," end quote. Now, at first glance, that might seem like a really weird reference to compare it to Pulp Fiction. However, listeners of our previous episode on Postal will note that Running with Scissors likes to compare their games to Pulp Fiction. For example, a March the 20th, 1997 press release for the original Postal declared, quote, "This game theoretically represents as much of a shock to the software entertainment system as Pulp Fiction did for the world of cinema," end quote. So like I said, I cannot definitively prove that a Running with Scissors person wrote this, but I think they did. I think someone at the company wrote this review. So the first narrative is that the people who gave it bad reviews obviously never played it. The second narrative presented by Running with Scissors is that publications that negatively review the games are actively conspiring against them. A frequent litany from the company is that tons of critics really think their games are hilarious, but their mean old editors and corporate overlords force them to give Postal 2 bad reviews. Think again to the way Vince Desi referred to Ziff Davis and saying that they're clearly doing this for those guys. Also, as Desi explained in a 2010 interview with Patrick Shaw of GamePro, he said, quote, "I'll give you an example of something that happened after Postal 2 came out. A review site was going to give it an 8.5. A day later, we got a call from the reviewer who said, 'Look, I'm really sorry, but my editor won't allow me to give you a rating more than a 2. Do you want me to scratch the whole story?' I told them no, go ahead and run it," end quote. Now, I'm not calling Desi a liar, but as far as I know, no one has ever come forward to back up these kinds of claims. Because that seems like a huge ethical thing that maybe somewhere down the line, someone like leaves their job at like IGN or GameSpot or wherever else he thinks these things are coming from and say, "Yeah, my editor used to tell me to give bad reviews to games that he didn't like," or whatever. Like, he's clearly trying to spoil the well when it comes to critical reception of this game. And that seems to be easier for him to swallow than saying that his games aren't well designed. It's obviously that they're compromised and people are conspiring against him. Now, why editors would want to deliberately tank Postal 2? Well, that's obvious. The game is too extreme and Running with Scissors are too courageous, telling the jokes that the liberals can't handle, so the powers that be have to actively try to silence them. In fact, when later asked about Postal 2's bad Metascore, Desi explained in a 2014 Reddit AMA, quote, "I know for a fact that several times reviewers loved Postal, but their editors wouldn't allow a high score. Political correctness, what we're up against," end quote.
Hey, Vince Desi, let me just tell you, when the liberals try to silence you, they don't do it with a cat.
So there you go. It's not that you made a deliberately gross, racist game with shitty hit detection and abysmally long load times. It's that those mean old editors at IGN and GameSpot and whoever, with their political correctness, don't want to give your shitty game a fair shake. Oh dear, if we don't stand up for Postal 2, we may never be able to do a rape joke ever again. My God, where does it end?
Yeah, I think the evidence you laid out pretty much speaks for itself and is also in keeping with the original Postal.
Yeah, but I mean, I kind of see the point that, first they came for the games where you can pee on people. Then they came for the games where you can use a cat as a silencer. And then they came for the games where you can behead cops with a shovel. And then when they came for me, there were no other games by Running with Scissors left to defend me.
Yeah.
All right. Let's fast forward a few years. So for the rest of the 2000s and the early 2010s, Running with Scissors found itself working hard to prop up their flagship product as it teetered toward irrelevancy. On June the 25th, 2003, Running with Scissors declared victory in its trademark battle with the U.S. Postal Service. And for more on that, check out our previous episode on Postal. So, of course, they announced that they did that. Not soon after, on July the 10th, 2003, the company announced a contest where the person who sent the most extreme Postal 2 screenshot could win a party with the dudes at Running with Scissors. So, yeah, yay. and the ability to take part in a nude photo shoot with the Postal Babes, which was supposedly going out for a 2004 calendar. Runners-up got themselves used underwear worn by a Postal Babe, so that's not gross or sad at all.
Wait, so who was going to be nude in the photo shoot?
Allegedly the Postal Babes. However, I have no evidence this contest ever happened. I have not found any evidence of a Postal 2 calendar. I've seen nothing else beside this one press announcement. I think they just put this out there as a hoax to get a little bit of extra attention for shock value, which is not uncharacteristic of Running with Scissors from what we've seen so far. During the summer of 2003, when gameplay footage briefly appeared in the music video for the Black Eyed Peas song Where Is the Love, Running with Scissors put out a press release with Desi doing an absolutely cringe-worthy attempt at a Snoop Dogg impression. I'm way too white to read this, but I will leave it in the notes if people want to read it on our website, scandalousgamespodcast.wordpress.com. It is yikes on bikes. It is not good. They also optioned the game into a movie. In October 2005, Running with Scissors announced the movie rights had been picked up by none other than our old friend, Dr. Uwe Boll.
No way.
Now, if you recall and see our previous episode on Uwe Boll didn't often mention that he was a gamer or played video games, but he did mention that he liked Postal. I will tell you what, the pairing of Uwe Boll and Vince Desi is a match made in heaven. Considering, again, if you go back to our previous episode on Uwe Boll also, his common litany is that people who give his movies bad reviews never actually watch them, and that people are being deliberately mean on him on the internet to drum him out of the business. So I could see him and Desi having a lot in common. Desi also appears in the movie as the Uwe Boll. Desi dresses up as the unofficial mascot of the Postal series, which is a character called Crotchy, which is an anthropomorphic pair of testicles. That's a real thing. As for this movie, Boll's Postal movie premiered in 2008 on a paltry 6 screens worldwide. 6 of them. And it earned less than $150,000 on a $10 to $15 million budget. Yeah, not good. Not good.
You gotta be fucking kidding me.
Boll, who is also known for accusing critics who give him bad reviews of not actually watching his movies, blamed the movie's failure on political correctness. It had nothing to do with the fact that at that point, people realized he was box office poison, and the number of movie theaters willing to pick up his movies had been declining precipitously at that time, to the point that at that point, he was like, no one wanted to touch him.
Can all these guys just get a fucking room already? Like Vince Desi, Uwe Boll, Jack Thompson, anybody who believes in me is smart. Anyone who criticizes me doesn't know what they're talking about and is lying.
Am I so out of touch? No, it's everyone else who was wrong. All right. Oh, yeah, I should point out that occasionally they did game-making things, too. In December 2003, they released Share the Pain, which was a Postal 2 expansion that had multiplayer and fixed some of the technical issues, including smoothing out some of the game's horrendous load times. I should also point out that by the time Share the Pain came out, Whiptail had parted ways with Running with Scissors for unspecified reasons. So if you're keeping score at home, this means that Running with Scissors had 2 game releases and lost 2 publishers in the process. Also, despite their kvetching about critics being unfair to them, it did gain a more positive reception. For example, when reviewing Share the Pain, GameSpot bumped up the game's initial 4.8 out of 10 to a decent 6.2 out of 10. In 2005, they put out another expansion, Apocalypse Weekend, that added 2 more levels, Saturday and Sunday. They also stayed pretty active with the game's modder community, even bundling 2 fan creations in their 2006 compilation of Postal and Postal 2. Running with Scissors also had a brief but disastrous stint as a publisher, possibly reasoning that you can't get dropped by your publisher if you're the one publishing the game, right? In 2006, they announced the anticipated sequel to Postal 2, Postal 3. This time they outsourced the game to a Russian company called Arkela. Hey there, fellow netizens. This is Kevin back in the editor show with another brief correction. I don't know how I missed this in the initial recording, but I mispronounced the Russian publisher of Postal 3. It's not Arkela, it's Akela. So apologies for the slip of the tongue. Back to the show. They were a big Russian publisher, and they outsourced it to a development company called Trash Masters, which seems like the most appropriate name for a game development firm for a game like this. The game went through a rough production, to say the least. Remember, it was announced in 2006. It didn't come out till 2011. And when it came out, even longtime Postal fans hated it. It wasn't because of the game's humor, because all it did was get more crass and more racist and more gross. But apparently it was also even more technically broken than Postal 2. And so even the people who agreed with all that humor before also thought this was a shitty game. And in fact, it got so bad, Running with Scissors pulled the game from their online store in 2012, and as of this recording, have completely disavowed it. They pretend it doesn't exist anymore. They actually on their website actively discourage people from buying it because apparently they took it off their store, but Arkilla didn't take it off of theirs. And so they were still selling it and making money off it. And then Arkilla went under. Arkilla was a goddamn mess, apparently. So they really knew how to pick them Running with Scissors. But so yeah, not so great for Postal 3. And I will say, if people want to hear more about that, Matt McMuscles did a really great video about the development of Postal 3 on his series called What Happened. And this other great online scholar named Noah Caldwell-Jave did a video analysis of the entire Postal series, and he talked about Postal 3 in addition to the rest of the series.
Kevin, it's funny that they felt the need to release a multiplayer expansion to Postal 2 because there's another way you can play this multiplayer. It's called grocery shopping. You go into a store. It has other players, also known as people, in it. You choose things to buy and you get in line with them and you decide whether or not you want to be a productive member of society. And the way to win that game is to choose yes. It's self-checkout. It's either that or somebody on a conveyor belt. Those are your options. You still have to pay for everything, though.
What's the peeing options like in that game?
Yeah, no, don't do that.
Oh, you're infringing on my freedoms. This political correctness is driving me crazy here.
It's a good game. There's some yummy stuff in that game.
I'm glad we're laughing now because this is going to take a slightly dark turn. However, despite some rough years, Running with Scissors' fortunes took a sudden turn for the better in 2014, and it was all thanks to GamerGate. That's right. 10 episodes in, we're finally talking about fucking GamerGate. Now, the entire sordid, emotionally exhausting, traumatic history of GamerGate will be its own episode. So I'm going to give you the absolute short version of GamerGate, right? Are you all familiar with GamerGate?
Yeah, I think enough for this conversation for sure.
You know, I only know just a little tiny bit, so I'll appreciate your recap.
But basically, like the alt-right before they turn their focus away from just video games and everything else in the world.
Pretty much. All right, so let's give you the short version here. So in 2014, an angry subset of the gaming community organized an online movement. The details, I'm not going to get into the details of that, but their basic push was what they called for quote unquote ethics in games journalism, while alleging various conflicts of interest among members of the mainstream gaming press. That's in theory. In practice, this largely translated into peddling various conspiracy theories, railing against any form of video game criticism, and denouncing any efforts to make gaming as a medium or a business more conducive to communities that weren't straight cisgender white dudes. Incidentally, its tactics also relied heavily on harassing people perceived as their enemies, many of whom just happened to be marginalized people in the gaming community. Funny how that worked out. To the extent that it had an ethos, GamerGate advocates argued in part that video games were for entertainment and should only be examined on their technical merits. So the game critics should focus specifically on, graphics, controls, level design, entertainment value, that's what games specifically are for. They're entertainment pieces, and that any attempts to critically examine video games beyond that, for example, addressing representation in games, such as the roles of, say, women or people of color, or again, pretty much any character depiction that isn't a straight white dude, or, like any form of analysis of the social, cultural, or political messages of video games, are just social justice warriors, or SJWs, inserting their own politics into video games. Thus, the real gamers, and of course, the GamerGaters view themselves as the real gamers, need to stand up for the medium that they love against these outside agitators. So of course, because SJWs and these mainstream journalists and any other critics are not real gamers. And so they don't understand it. They're just trying to tear down this medium we like. And we need to defend video gaming by any means necessary. Nothing is out of bounds for this. So harassing messages, doxing, literally sending death threats and things like that, all in bounds. Although GamerGaters will argue that they don't represent the rest of GamerGaters, although they also don't completely disavow them either. And you know what? All that was pretty sweet for Running with Scissors, considering they've been peddling this kind of shit for years, peddling conspiracy theories and demonizing game journalists who were mean to them since before it was cool. So it should come as no shock then that they are one of the only video game companies to come out in support of GamerGate. On October the 8th, 2014, Running with Scissors published a statement on the company Tumblr page simply titled #GamerGate. Most of it is a tirade against game journalists broadly defined, whom Running with Scissors called, quote, dishonest favor seekers, money grubbers, liars, and cheats, end quote, and accused of various nefarious acts, including bribery, corruption, and, quote, denouncing, shaming, and outright insulting their own audience, end quote. They accused journalists and academics of imposing their values on the quote unquote real gamers and trying to completely erase the gamer identity. Because you see, Running with Scissors are the real gamers, and they're denouncing all these fake gamers and these outside agitators, mainstream journalists and social justice warriors who are, sullying the purity of our gaming medium. I'm using some very deliberate verbiage, by the way. And I mean, GamerGate was a golden opportunity for Running with Scissors. It gave them access to a vocal niche market that had no problem with Postal's content, and in fact, celebrated that kind of content, and who, like them, were actively hostile of critics and journalists. Any negative criticism of the series could then be called into question. Clearly, if you didn't like the game, you obviously didn't play it, or you're trying to push some kind of liberal agenda. Bad press then is either symbolic of the business interests that control mainstream gaming news sites, or critics are trying to impose political correctness and silence any game that doesn't fit into their worldview. Positive press, meanwhile, reinforces just how awesome these games are, and that Running with Scissors is, they're telling it like it is, regardless of what the woke PC police say. Thus, GamerGate allowed Running with Scissors to reshape Postal 2 from a mediocre shooter into an act of defiance, a liberty bond in the war on political correctness. Every dollar, every download, every minute of your game playing time is your own personal fuck you to the so-called game journalists and SJWs and libtards who want to trample on your freedom to, I guess, endure long load times and shitty hit detection and jokes about how all Muslims are terrorists. Traipsing across that map to own the libs, So despite their public aversion to politics in video games, Running with Scissors, thanks to GamerGate, helped transform buying and playing Postal 2 into a political act. In this respect, Postal 2, going back to our opening, may just be the first MAGA game. It weaponized the segment of the gaming community, resentful and angry at mainstream institutions such as the press, academics, liberals, and anyone who didn't fit into their narrow model of gamer, framing their outrage and their harassment tactics as their crusade to protect the sanctity and purity of their pastime from the outside agitators and fake gamers of the world. Think again how Desi pronounced Gamer and Computer Game Review as failing publications, dumping on his perfect game to prop up their reputations and push an agenda. And I think with this, it's also worth mentioning that the game has gained a popularity in the MAGA crowds and the alt-right. For example, former Breitbart editor, far-right publication Breitbart, their former editor, Milo Yiannopoulos, praised the game, and Running with Scissors even had him voice himself in the 2015 Postal 2 expansion, Paradise Lost. So this is where we're at now.
Yeah, it seems like that's like a compelling parallel to draw, because it seems like people are supporting it who have probably never played it. Anybody who's played this game seems like they're a psychopath. So if you're supporting it, it's clearly not because you enjoyed playing it, but because of the views that it espouses, which is a very MAGA thing to do.
Kevin, I got to congratulate you on this detective work and linking these two issues together, because I entered this understanding of Postal not assuming that there was a relationship, and showing that they have actually started to merge. It's very interesting, because sadly for the people that will buy Postal 2 to make a political statement, I don't care what they play. I don't care what you want to play. Unlike all of the conversations about politics today, where people will ask you, where did you get those facts and that facts? If your experience tells you Postal 2 is a great game to play, go ahead and spend 30 hours playing it. I'm not going to do it. I've played hundreds, maybe thousands of video games. And if it's not fun, I just move on. It's as simple as that. You can't make a movement to suddenly get people to realize that art truly is art. people have a deep understanding of what is good art. Even though we can't express it, we know. And so, sure, you want to pitch Postal 2 and use that as your political ad for your ideas and your politics, great. But I say something that we've alluded to. Grand Theft Auto did the same thing, except they did it well. You could go through Grand Theft Auto and you could pull your gun out and you could shoot somebody. That's all Postal 2 was, right? In Grand Theft Auto, you always had that choice, unless it was some sort of cutscene. And that's something that people recognized immediately with Grand Theft Auto 3. Immediately we recognized that. But that was cool, the idea, but that wasn't all there was to the game. The game was fun to play. You can transition to a car. You can drive around this really neat city. You're inside of this really neat world. I remember playing Grand Theft Auto 3 and watching people play it for hours. And so sadly, it doesn't matter. Video games are just a beautiful form of expression. And Running with Scissors, which I think is a great name for a company, they just didn't do a good enough job.
I feel like that, like linking this to the MAGA movement does make perfect sense. And like what Phil and Elford were saying about how, like, yeah, people who embrace this game now are doing it for the statement of what that means rather than a game that you actually like. It just reminds me of, like, I'm going to take horse dewormer to own the libs. I'm going to burn my Nikes that I paid for to own the libs. I mean, like, things that are making a statement without you benefiting or even enjoying the process of making that statement, which it sounds like playing this game exactly is. Like, you're doing something maybe to make a statement without enjoying a moment of it.
It's a total cut off your nose to spite your face kind of thing. It's very much like, if people play Postal, and I'll talk about statistics in a minute, how people are actually playing this game. But like, if a person played Postal and they had fun, like, more power to you. Like, clearly you and I have very different definitions of fun. And it's like, again, it's that whole thing about, there's an old saying about resentment, that resentment is taking poison and hoping that someone else dies. You are subjecting yourself to this game because you feel like you're making a statement. It's like, dude, fine. I'm going to be over here playing Bloodborne. Have a good time with that. If you want to eat broken glass, that's on your time,
I mean, Kevin, Andy, I will say for the record that taking ivermectin did clear up my constipation. And so there was some benefit.
Well, I think what cleared up your constipation was when I stuck that gun up your butt and used you as a silencer. The ivermectin was just incidental.
I'm glad you guys are talking solutions because I'm all bound up. I can use something to cleanse me out.
I feel like I need to make the disclaimer this. None of our advice should be constituted as medical advice or opinion.
Yeah, definitely. Oh, yeah, for the record, I didn't actually take ivermectin. I don't know how it works. I have no thoughts on it.
You take it for lice or parasites.
Is it really? I didn't know that.
That's what it's for. Like, it's if you give your dog heartworm medication, that's based on ivermectin. It's an anti-parasitic. And like, people who argue that, oh, the guy who invented ivermectin got a Nobel Prize, he did, for its intended use. Anyway, it's really complicated because some of it ties into like healthcare access and like people where they don't have good health insurance and they'll like take medication like for their dog or something because it's cheaper and more accessible because your healthcare stinks.
Do you think that'll be one of the tests you have to do in Postal 4? You have to go to your local pharmacy and buy out all the ivermectin.
Dude, hold on to that. We're going to talk about that in a second. Hold on to that. Okay, all of this to say that Postal 2 gained a second life as an idea rather than a game. Something praised and defended, but not necessarily played. This can actually be seen in the player statistics for this game. So for example, the game has over 54,000 reviews on Steam, and most of them are overwhelmingly positive. However, you got to look a little bit deeper in the data because the other thing that Steam keeps track of is achievements. And achievement statistic tracking is a really good way of measuring how far people are going into games and how long they're staying with them. So anyone want to guess, based on the Steam achievement percentages, what percentage of players have the achievement for finishing the first level? So for getting through Monday, what percentage of players do you think had that achievement?
2%.
Ooh, yeah, I was going to say 5 max.
I'm going to say 100% because I think this game was only played by 4 serial killers.
And me. Based on Steam achievements, 47.8% have unlocked the achievement for finishing the first level. Less than half of players make it through the first level of this game. Hey there, fellow netizens. This is Kevin in the editor with just a brief addition here. According to Steam achievement statistics, as of the time I'm recording this in 2025, the percentage of players who have completed the first level of Postal 2, the Monday stage, is now 51.8%. So in the years since we recorded, it's finally gone over 50% of people getting through the first level, in case you were curious. I'll include a link to the Steam achievement statistics for Postal 2 in the notes. Back to the show. Now, knowing that statistic, guess what the percentage of players who actually finish all 5 days is?
5%.
Yeah, 10%?
3%.
16.3% of players.
What? It's a lot higher than I thought.
It's not super high, but it's kind of surprisingly higher than you think it should be. That being said, I mentioned Paradise Lost briefly before, the 2015 expansion, the one that that far-right dude is in. The percentage of players who have the achievement for finishing that game, 4.5%. So yeah, not a lot of people playing this game for very long. And also I should point out that that achievement for beating Paradise Lost is called Better Than Postal 3. All this is to say that Postal 2 is one of those games that has become more useful as an idea, even for the company that created it. And so that's pretty much where Running with Scissors and its flagship title have stayed ever since. Fast forward to the present day, and Postal 2 does have a cult following, although how many people are playing it to the end is something we've addressed. Thanks to digital distribution and a decentralized games market, Running with Scissors can specifically target their small but vocal fan base without having to pretend to care about retailers, publishers, negative critical reviews, or anything close to broad market appeal. They've got the niche. Basically, if you're angry about cancel culture run amok, feel white men are the real ones being oppressed, that women and people of color and gay people should stop whining about oppression, and that wokeness and political correctness are real, tangible threats, then great, Running with Scissors is a game for you. The flip side, the kind of monkey's paw wish that they've made with this, is that it's pretty much the only market where they're relevant. And Running with Scissors then needs to wring every last penny they can out of these people, because outside of this niche, nobody's paying attention to them. All Running with Scissors has got are these people now. This has created a kind of amusing scenario where the only way they can stay in business is to grift GamerGaters. For example, on October the 14th, 2019, Running with Scissors released the, again, long anticipated sequel, Postal 4, No Regrets, as a crude alpha build through Steam's early access platform. And over the last 2 years, going on 3, the company has been drip feeding updates to this game with a new buggy early build of a level every couple of months. For example, the Friday level only dropped on November the 22nd, 2021, and all of this is still an alpha build. Do you want to guess how much they're charging people for the privilege of playing a game that is way far away from being finished?
Is this like a full price, like $60 experience?
I'm thinking like $20.
Bearing in mind, this is a game that they've been very upfront about the fact this game is nowhere far near finished. It's an alpha build. Like, they're nowhere close to having this be a retail release.
I think if they're hard up for cash, they might charge something like $100.
For the privilege of playing this alpha build, you get to pay Running with Scissors $40.
That's pretty steep.
I wonder how many people are willing to pay that money.
No idea, but it gets better or worse depending on your perspective on this. They also have the gall to sell a physical copy of this game. A game that is not close to being finished, which they've been releasing incrementally on Steam Early Access, which is called the Coming Early Janky Edition, which they are also selling for $40 on their website.
I mean, at this point, you can't even blame them. They're saying, we're selling you a janky version of a game. Whoever's paying it is just like willingly buying into the statement that having this game says.
It's like when Cards Against Humanity sold a box of shit and people paid to have a thing of like bullshit sent to their house. You got to appreciate how upfront they are. This is garbage and we're selling you garbage, but you're willing to pay $40 for this garbage.
Or that Kickstarter that was just potato salad.
Yeah.
Hey there, fellow netizens. This is Kevin back in the editor's chair with I guess just an update right here about how Postal 4 is doing. So when we recorded this episode a few years ago, Postal 4 No Regrets was still in early access. It did eventually have its full release on PC on April the 20th, 2022. Running with Scissors, very original, 420. But its reviews since it's come out with its full release have been, to say that they've been mixed would be generous. Looking at their Metascore right now,
In terms of critical reviews, the game currently has a 31 out of 100 on Metacritic based on 20 critical reviews. Now, I hear what you're saying. The critics who give bad reviews, they didn't really play Postal 4. They're there deliberately to push their agenda, but it also has an extremely mixed reception when it comes to the user score. Based on 174 ratings, the game averages 4 out of 10. So even not great among users. And both critics and players had some very, very similar complaints in the sense that, going aside from running with scissors politics, going aside from running with scissors is content in their game. Something that people talked about across the board is this game just isn't very well polished. It's apparently subject to significant glitches, and even worse than that, complete crashes. So it seems like in terms of a game, it is very hard to say whether or not it is even functional, let alone able to convey the messages that it hopes. Now, that being said, what's really interesting about, particularly when looking at critical reviews of Postal 4, is that does not stop Postal's defenders and running with scissors' defenders from rushing onto any, what we think of mainstream gaming news site, places like GameSpot and IGN, and flooding their comments with conversations about how the reviewers don't understand Postal, that they don't get its humor, or again, that they're trying to push an agenda. Which, what I find very interesting about that is that the ways that the discourse over Postal 2 that running with scissors set up when they created this narrative about Postal 2 persists to this day, that it seems that it's very, very difficult for fans of the Postal series to take negative reviews seriously and will not really engage with them in any meaningful way. For example, a user called Red Moth over at Metacritic had a post from April 26, 2023, when he said, quote, there are people who only see the negative in a product. An example of this is the critics, and Postal 4 is one of them. Says it really is a good game, and it's similar to Postal 2. Obviously, the people who don't understand the black humor of this game, and I understand that. The good thing is you can choose which voice you prefer for the Postal dude. So every cloud is a silver lining in that 9 out of 10 review. And there are, on the other side of that, there are some people, and again, looking over at the Metacritic scores, who give the game positive reviews mostly because they like running with scissors and not necessarily because it is a good game. Because they like running with scissors and they like the Postal series and see it as this statement. So, for example, a post, again, going back to Metacritic, dated January 18, 2023 from a user called Hades Helm, says, quote, normally it's not a 10 out of 10 game, but I want to increase the score a bit. In fact, I defend this. Whoever gives points should give it neither more nor less. The game isn't very good, but it's not bad enough to score 30 points. 60 is ideal for this good. I can safely say that Stray is much more boring than this game. I'm not even going to talk about that quote, but where this person clearly sees the benefit in boosting the Metascore over the quality of the game, which is very fascinating. Going back to Steam reviews, again, the overall reviews, according to Steam reviews, are mostly positive for Postal 4, based on 9,441 reviews as of this recording here. However, what's an interesting contrast to that is that looking over the Steam achievement statistics, and again, unlike Postal 2, where you could say, well, achievement statistics might be low because the achievements were added well after the game had come out, looking at Postal 4's, only one of Postal 4's achievements has been unlocked by more than 15% of users. That is the Look Ma, I'm a Hobo achievement, which is to construct your homeless beggar's sign, which 49.7% of users, so even then less than half. And the next closest is, and remember, respect is everything, which is to reach a maximum heat level with the fuzz and survive, which only 14% of users have achieved. So it might suggest that people are buying this game to support the company, but not necessarily playing it, or not necessarily playing it for very long. All right, so that's just some stray thoughts about Postal 4, no regrets. Anyway, back to the show.
Now, all of that might sound pretty cynical, but don't worry. No one can accuse Vince Desi of being insincere to his fan base. For proof he's on their side, I direct you to his social media, especially his Twitter, which is a hellscape of COVID-19 conspiracies, cries of election fraud, and other Tucker Carlson / Ben Shapiro / Alex Jones / Let's Go Brandon style far-right bullshit. If you told me he stormed the Capitol on January 6th, I would not be shocked.
Hey there, Phil. It is Kevin back here in the editor's chair. I'm not going to go into specific details, but Vince's social media pretty much very, very similar to what it was when I said this the first time. I'll let you read it yourself. But anyway, back to the show.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that doesn't surprise me at all at this point.
All right, with that, final thoughts on Postal 2.
Something I realized is that I could create a video game like this as a Trojan horse to start collecting personally identifying information on people who are likely to storm the Capitol again. Like this game is such a red flag for a certain subset of people that I want to see that Venn diagram. I want to see the Venn diagram of people who platted Postal 2 and people who went to the Capitol on January 6th. I would venture to guess it looks like a circle.
Yeah, and just set up a bot that just, anybody who does complete the game, just those names automatically just get sent to the FBI.
This was a really cool story. You start out with this company that makes this game that obviously is trying to tell what they believe is the American story or the European story, or the real person's story, but they don't tell a story. They just make a really crappy game and they release it. And then fast forward 10 plus years, they've created it in a company that basically is just feeding fringe mentalities. And that now they're just making their profit off of feeding these fringe mentalities rather than making good video games. It's actually fascinating. I wonder how well their company's doing. Because now they have a market. I can't imagine that they're making nearly as much money as if they had created a good video game. But they have some sort of profit scheme. And what they're doing now, releasing this alpha build and charging people money and people purchasing it as a badge of being part of a certain club, it's fascinating to me. This is video games being used in a way that I haven't heard of before. The video game itself is being used as the tool rather than the video game itself being, how do I say this? The video game itself is no longer the product they're creating. The product they're creating is the emotions and the sentiment tied to the feelings that whoever they believe is the audience are supposed to have. And the video game itself is just a tool that they're, attaching. Kind of like when you're trying to sell Girl Scout cookies. And the truth is, the money is supposed to fund the Girl Scout troop, but the cookies are the means that you're going to collect the donations to sell the Girl Scout cookies. It's interesting to me.
Yeah, and this game being adopted by the MAGA community is just such a striking parallel because the MAGA community originally rallied around someone who was never successful in their chosen field, but created a brand about what they stand for. I mean, it really is a one for one. So yeah, everybody, don't be like Kevin and play this game.
Yeah, please don't tell people how I live. I mean, the joke is on me because Running with Scissors has $2 of my dollars and several hours of my time. I will say that I'm very relieved to be coming near the end of this episode because I have spent way too much time thinking about these people. So my final point is that, again, joke is on me, but also the other point is that this is kind of jumping off something you said, Alfred. It's these guys have accomplished something rather extraordinary and something that I feel is so unprecedented in gaming. I mean, these guys haven't released a full game. I'm not counting Postal 4 because God knows when they're ever going to be finished with that. But they haven't released a full game since 2003. They haven't released any meaningful content. Again, not counting Postal 4 because again, it's so early on. They haven't released any meaningful content since 2015, at all. Any content, and yet they've been able to capture the small cult. I mean, think about FromSoft. From Software has a really, really dedicated following of gamers. There are people who absolutely love FromSoft. And FromSoft, to do that, they had to make a succession of consistently fun, exciting, well-developed games over the course of several years to earn that reputation.
Yeah, they release a banger every 2 years, right?
Yeah, they're awesome. They knock it out of the park every time. What they really should have been doing, I mean, if they were smart, these chumps would have spent all this time complaining about cancel culture in between re-releasing Kingsfield every couple of years. And, not wasting all of that time, all those wasted hours of programming, games like Demon's Souls and Dark Souls and Bloodborne and Sekiro and Elden Ring and all of that.
Hey there, fellow netizens. This is Kevin in the editor's chair with a brief update here because this doesn't quite hold up anymore because since we recorded this episode, Running with Scissors, in fact, has put out additional games, although they're still
Postal games. And so the first of these, of course, we mentioned here in the episode is Postal 4 No Regrets, which originally released on Steam Early Access on October the 14th, 2019, and finally had a full PC release on April the 20th, 2022. And we've already talked about the reception to that game. In addition to that, on June the 9th, 2022, Running with Scissors released Postal Brain Damage, which is a spin-off game, again, based on the Postal series, which was developed by Hyperstrange and Creative Forge Games. So another one where Running with Scissors was a publisher. Unlike Postal 4, Postal Brain Damage is generally better received across the board, again, citing Metacritic. It currently has a 71 Metacritic score among critics, averaging from 6 critical reviews, and user scores out of 64 ratings. It has an 8.1. It seems generally a lot better received than Postal 4. So, yay, Running with Scissors. I'm still curious of how you stayed in operation, but I suppose that would be for another episode. But just wanted to jump in with that. Back to the show.
Like, I can almost, to the point that I could be kind of impressed by Running with Scissors and Vince Desi. I'm kind of impressed by that. That's kind of impressive.
I would agree. I mean, to that point, hey, if you don't have to turn a profit to keep existing, I guess anything is possible.
Yeah, it's like they've somehow developed a post-capitalist game company where like most companies run on the fact that we need to make money and people demand a product and we supply that product. They run on the operation that like no one's demanding any product. They're not supplying any product. And yet somehow they're still here.
I have a radical theory of how they're still in business. They're consistently getting blackmail money. And I think the clue was buried in one of the central core mechanics of Postal 2, the ability to urinate. Who do we know who's famous for having a lot of money and also famous for not wanting anybody to think there's a videotape of him being urinated on?
Allegedly. I'm just I don't want to get into all this allegedly.
Yes.
All allegedly.
So that's great, but we're going to get in so much trouble.
The statements made by Andy Hunter do not reflect the feelings of the other three.
Oh my God.
I like all the things that have been said about this game. It's the first post-capitalist game. It's the first MAGA game. The story involves Rod Blagojevich, Jack Thompson, and Vince Desi. Like, what more could you ask for?
All right, please tell me that Jack Thompson has been retained as the personal lawyer for Running with Scissors.
That would be hilarious, especially because he got disbarred in 2008. Again, debate, Jack, Vince, come on, make this happen.
Hey there, fellow netizens. Kevin back here one more time in the editor's chair as we wrap up. It was a lot of fun revisiting this episode. I may go back and do a couple of these things when we're in between projects, but thank you so much. This is the first time you listen to us. Thank you for listening. If you've been listening since we started the show, thank you so much. I hope that 2025 is everything you hope it is and more. I have a lot of fun stories that I hope to be able to tell you throughout the rest of this year. So with that will do it for today's episode of Scandalous Games. If you like what we're doing and want to help the show, subscribe or follow us wherever you get your podcasts and leave us a rating. If you want to learn more, check out our website, scandalousgamespodcast.wordpress.com, where I publish the show notes and the sources for every episode. Our theme music is Occam Seekwe by Seek Knowledge, via the Free Music Archive, used under CC BY NC SA 3.0 US license. If you have a question, comment, or idea for a topic for a future episode, email us at scandalousgamespodcast@gmail.com. And until next time, I'm Kevin Impellizeri, and for Elford Stephens, Andy Hunter, and Phil Thomas, thanks for listening, and we'll see you next Scandal. Remember to subscribe to Fat World Gaming on YouTube, and listen to So We Were Talking About Beast Wars wherever you get your podcasts.